Hello and welcome to the Zach Thinks Here podcast. I am super excited today to have Caylee Cresta joining us. She has been I don't know. I hope I get this introduction right. She's been a significant influence on me since I became a father. Back in 2021, I became a father in August, and I started making content about fatherhood and had some early eyeballs on me because I was talking about that instead of my normal personal development stuff, which I'd been making for the previous 4 years. And all of a sudden, my algorithm started feeding me moms, talking about mom problems and talking about invisible labor and the dichotomies of what it is to be a parent today. And I remember one of the things that I think was really striking about Kayleigh is that, well, I'm going to speak to you, is I think one of the wonderful parts that I enjoyed, one was that like you told it how it was, which I needed to hear because I think there were plenty of you aren't doing the emotional labor for a lot of your viewers. Like you're speaking a lot more, I think, to women and speaking out, creating language for things that aren't fully understood or articulated. But you would drop these unbelievable monologues. I was like, not only are they like so good and like they're a little, they're a little sassy sometimes, but like there's also like an academic level of understanding underneath it that I can't pull off. Like if you watch my videos versus yours, every 3 to 4 seconds, I'm pausing to think about what I have to say next. You just drop these unbelievable monologues. And I remember that was like, I think that was why I was also in awe of you as a creator, because I'd already made about two or 3,000 videos at that point. I was like, I don't know how she does that. So I think that was one of the first things that as a creator, I was in awe, but also just like the fearlessness that I think you also showed, because I have not received nearly the amount of hate. I probably never will because I get so much empathy for what I talk about. Versus like you and I'm trying to remember her name. She's the one that always laughs in her videos. I remember for a while I watched you two like back and forth, and the amount of hate that you guys would get was unbelievable.
Yeah.
But I'm excited to talk with you today and get to meet you for the first time as a fellow Massachusetts resident.
Are you from
And
Massachusetts?
Yeah,
I
I'm out
didn't know
west right
that.
now. Yeah, I grew up in
Wow.
Foxborough.
I didn't know that.
Yeah.
I'm learning this real time. This is awesome. I didn't know that. I love it.
But yeah, Kayleigh, I think one of the things I was hoping that you could share with us today is how much you've learned along the journey, how much, what kind of inspires you to continue creating, and like where you get the tough skin to deal with the men that are just being ugly, like letting their ugly out in your comment section. And thank you for coming today.
Thank you for having me. And before I answer, I just want to say I kind of mentioned this before we hit record, but I also want to thank you for just bringing authenticity to your content, right? And I think there's a certain vulnerability. You said if you watch my content compared to yours, and I just want to say there's something that you do that I could never do, right? And it's so equally as important that we're all in this space and we're all working towards the same thing. And I think probably where I can maybe make people really angry, I think there's something really special about the fact that you're able to draw empathy from people, right? Because there are people that aren't going to listen to me, but may listen to you just because you're a fellow man, but also because you are talking in more of a, learning, understanding. And again, I said this before we started recording, but I just want to say, because I think it's important now that we are recording, your ability to know what you don't know. And I think that's very special and that's very rare. So I had to thank you before I got into the question. Now to the question. I think the thick skin comes from a place of, at the end of the day, it's not about me. I think of some of the messages that I get of women saying, listen, I don't feel alone because for the first time today, I have words for what I'm feeling. And so if to be able to give that to a woman, I have to get death threats and some of the craziest insults, I've gotten to a place, not always at the beginning, but I've gotten to a place where I very much feel as though if you're sitting here and insulting me because of what I said, then you are exactly who I'm talking about. And I have to take that with me, right? I have to sit there and say, okay, listen, I struck a nerve because I was meant to strike a nerve. And I think more good comes out of it than bad. But I also, I worked in construction prior to being a creator. I just have thick skin anyways. I'm definitely a recovering people pleaser, but I always had thicker skin. So I brought that with me into it, and it's just gradually gotten thicker.
I'm almost surprised, and I feel like I don't see as I spend a lot less time on TikTok these days, and I know that you come up a little bit less in my algorithm, but I'm almost surprised I don't hear more metaphors of talking about construction, because I feel like a lot of those blue collar workers are the ones that are, I attempted stitching your video this morning and the audio got all messed up, but um, I think you've had so much time in the trenches with guys that have a lot of that mindset of, I'm sweating my face off. I am working really hard. I'm doing manual labor, and feeling like that should trump all other labor within their home. Like the
Yeah,
value of it.
yeah, and something that I find kind of interesting, and it's why I kind of walked into this saying, if nothing else, I want to translate what people are trying to say to each other, right? Because a lot of times, by the time people start talking, or I should say, by the time people really want to get out what they're feeling, resentment has already built, right? So people are talking to each other and there's all these feelings behind it. And because resentment is already built, people don't want to listen. They just want to be heard. So one thing, and I've told this story before, I would always laugh because I would see these guys who would say to me, oh, my wife never shuts up. She doesn't stop nagging. She this, she that. And then I would see the same guy, a year or two later. And now he'd be telling me that him and his wife never have sex. His wife won't talk to him. She completely tunes him out. And my only answer would be, well, you wanted her to shut up. So she shut up, right? She did exactly what you were telling her to do. Maybe not in words, but your behavior told her you just wanted her to be quiet. You just wanted her to stop nagging you. And when you tell somebody, again, doesn't have to be in words, in actions, stop telling me what you're feeling. You don't want to open up anything. You don't want to open up your mind. You don't want to open up your body. You just, fine, we'll be roommates. And you start to see why so many people live that same experience.
As you've gone on and shared these messages and helped people try to articulate these things, what do you think is one of the things that you've shifted over your time as a creator? Like, has your approach changed? Have you adjusted your messaging? Have you strayed away from things? Have you leaned harder into things?
Probably not the answer you're going for, but something that I feel like I have to preface this with, because I think you'll totally agree with this as a fellow creator. I feel as though there are certain topics we have to stray away from because the content gets taken down, right? So I notice that if I talk about withholding sex, the video 9 times out of 10 is going to get taken down. Even though I'm not saying, you think of all the graphic, horrible stuff that's said online. And that has been super frustrating for me. And I feel like, and I'm curious if you feel the same, it does a number on your creativity sometimes, because you start wondering, how am I going to say certain things? How do I, to make sure that content lives, right? Because at the end of the day, we make stuff for people to see it. We make stuff with the hope that it's going to help someone. And if we put all this time into something that's not even going to be seen, so I feel like that has kind of swayed my content sometimes, which is super frustrating. What have I changed by choice? I would say trying to do stuff from different angles, right? There's certain topics I try to look at each topic, who's the audience, right? Sometimes I'll have people in my comments be like, oh, you're talking so slow, or you're talking so much kinder in this video. And it's because
Mm,
if I feel as though I was asked the question in a genuine way, I'm not here to preach. I'm not here to
mm,
point fingers in someone's face. I try to react exactly how I think I need to. So I never want to come off angry. You know, I have people tell me all the time, men are constantly telling me I'm such an angry woman. I'm not angry, I'm passionate, and I believe in what I'm
mm.
saying, right? If a man was saying the same thing as I was in the same tone, they would never be accused of being angry.
Yeah.
So I try to take that with me. You know, my stitches, I'm always going to be sassy. That's never going to stop because I'm in a mood after I see those things. Um but when I'm talking about, a guy genuinely asked me a question of, how can I start a conversation with my wife? I'm going to respond in a way with empathy because I
Mm.
appreciate the fact that that person wanted to ask the question. Do you feel like you've changed your how you approach your content?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, definitely before our kid came, I was talking about personal development stuff. I remember deciding to take TikTok seriously in 2021 when my students, I was a math teacher, and like I would come in and be like, yeah, my videos got like 50,000 views, and I'm thinking to myself of the multiple thousand YouTube videos I've made over the years. I've had one thing hit over 50,000. Screw this kid for making a 9-second stupid video. I can do better than that. So I
Right.
started taking TikTok seriously. And I think when I first started out, I was like just kind of sharing what it was like being a new dad because I took paternity leave for 3 months, which I
Mm-hmm.
know I found out during that time that was abnormal. I didn't know that was crazy.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and in that time, I think there were a lot of moments when it really went to my head, and I was doing like I would almost call it like dad thirst traps, where I was like vacuuming and like doing dishes and stuff on camera, and I was like, and I remember my wife calling me out at some point. She's like, "You never vacuum. Why are you vacuuming on camera? This is stupid." So there was that, and then I think I crossed a boundary that I'm glad that I saw quickly was I had my child and our newborn in like almost every video for probably 2 months straight almost. And
Mm-hmm.
then at one point I realized that I was using her more as a prop within the content rather than having her be like a part of it. And so I stopped putting her in my videos. I went cold turkey, and all of a sudden my viewership kind of dropped off. And I was like, damn, I don't actually have anything all that valuable to say. They were just here for the baby, which was tough to see and hear. And then Roe v. Wade was overturned, and I had a moment of like, I don't feel like I should be talking right now. I need to shut up and just like have the Kaylee Crestas and the Laura Dangers and the all the women of the world talk right now. So I was just duetting a bunch of stuff, and the viewership kind of continued to drop off because I was being pretty quiet because I just didn't feel like I had a voice in my niche, which was 90% women. And then later that summer, someone I think Laura recommended reading Fair Play.
Mm-hmm.
So I started reading that, shared my like takeaways from the book, and I think I made my first video talking about. I think I just added mental load for my wife, and that video is like 6.4 million on TikTok, which was my record at the time. And then I just kept talking about mental load, and then at some point, people were asking me for like educational stuff that they could share with their husbands, and then after a couple months of that, Fair Play invited me to be a facilitator to like coach people, and I realized I didn't actually have anything to offer women. Like I had nothing to coach them on. Sure, I can give them vocabulary, but that's all. So I was like, I need to talk to men, so I need to soften up quite a bit because I think I was very like I think there were a lot of moments where I was sharing the challenge of the journey, but at the same time, I was like, guys, here's what you need to do. And I was like kind of talking down to them. At some point, I was like, I need to show that I'm either on a level playing field or like I'm in the trenches with them,
Mm-hmm.
failing as we go. And so I think that's kind of where I've been for a long time. And there have been moments where I've wondered, should I aim for, this has become my full-time job as of January. So,
Mm-hmm.
a lot of my videos are I would call more lead magnets where I'm trying to bring in customers, but At the same time, my favorite DMs to receive are men saying, I've been watching your videos. They've been such good like conversation starters with my wife. I'm like,
Mhm.
thank you so much for what you do. So I'm glad that I'm not just making a difference for my customers, but I'm also making a difference for my viewers.
Mhm.
Um, so I think consistently trying to be humble, trying to share where I'm fucking things up,
Mhm.
um, has been has been both fun, scary. I think one I made a couple weeks ago was I was on a call and I usually ask what their job is so that I can draw metaphors for mental load. And he was a lawyer, and I said, "Do you have an assistant?" And I like knee jerk. I said like a minute later, I was like, "Is she?" And then I was like, "Oh my god!"
Mhm.
I I I just assumed it was a she. Like how misogynistic of me. Like that's. And then I was like, "Fuck! I got to make a video about this. I can't not."
Mhm.
And so those are like the scary ones where I know that I've screwed up and like, or I know I've put on mental load, or I've, I asked my wife a couple weeks ago because I've owned the dishes for about 2.5 years. I
Mhm.
said to her, it's like, yeah, I feel like a little bit unappreciated for the amount that I put into this. Meanwhile, like you just kind of leave trash, you leave like dishes out. And she's
Mhm.
like, well, now you know what it is to be a woman. I was like, fuck, I walked right into that one. Um,
I'll be totally honest with you. I've had some personal stuff going on, and I've been a little more absent, so I'm not watching as much as I typically do.
yeah.
Um, and
I can tell you repost a fair amount, and I know that I usually repost when I'm like, I don't have it in me to put something up, but let me go on my camera roll and throw something up there.
so uh, my dad has been going through a really bad divorce for about 5 years. And it's gotten to a point where it's gotten really scary, and that divorce has kind of become like a full-time job in a way. And I think we're, coming to the end, but it's taken a lot of time. Um, and so I'm just not, I'm not watching as much, and I'm hoping, within the next few weeks I'll be back to, I miss honestly creating content every day. It's been hard in a lot of ways, but
Is this your full time thing now?
yeah,
Okay.
yeah. So it I love your honesty, right? I love, and unfortunately I haven't seen, so like, and this happens every time I talk to a fellow creator, they're kind of mentioning a recent video and I haven't seen it.
Mm.
But I love your honesty. I love the fact that you can sit here and you can be like, yeah, I was using my baby as a prop. Like, and in that moment, that doesn't mean that was your intention, right?
Mm.
That's not what that means. And we have to be really clear about this. That doesn't mean that you're a bad person who got up that day with the intention of using your baby as a prop. That's not what that means. That doesn't mean that there's a bad bone in your body. That means that you weren't conscious of it, right? And until we have the tools to be conscious of it, the fact that you saw all this, but you were willing to talk about it, and you weren't only willing to talk about it with people you trust, you were willing to talk about it with your audience. And I think,
Took me a long while to get there. I've felt a lot of shame about that for a long time. So it's taken me probably took me a year and a half after realizing it that I could actually talk about it with people on podcasts, etc.
but I think it's important to sit here and say, well, how much more receptive are people to your messages because you're admitting that you're human, right? A lot of times, especially with male creators, we tend to see this kind of perfection, right? This character of perfection. Not all. There are certainly, I mean, Chesco, I love with all my heart. I love him. Um, you, same type of thing. You are being honest. You're talking. We have some really amazing male creators who are honest, right? But that's not what we tend to see. So when we do, I think it's really special, and I think we have to appreciate it for what it is. And I don't know if you know this, but in my relationship, we're total reverse gender roles, right?
Mm.
So um, he does most of this. We're total opposite. I'm the breadwinner. He's the stay-at-home parent, and there's definitely times he'll look at me and he'll be like, Kayleigh, you've left a trail of a mess. What are you doing? And I'm like, yeah, but I'm getting ready for a meeting and I'm this and I'm that. And I'll do it later. I'll do it when I get home. We're human, right? At the end of the day, the goal is never to stop being human. It's to be aware. And I think a lot of people miss the mark on that sometimes. And I think when you can sit here and admit to being human, that's when we make real progress. So thank you for that.
Have you considered making more content, sharing? Like, I just had a conversation with my husband where he was, doing the domestic labor, he was doing the invisible labor, and I didn't notice it.
So I'm going to be totally brutally honest with you right now. I probably have never admitted this online. I have a very hard line about not sharing my family. Mm-hmm. So you will never see my child's face. You will never, nothing. And that's a very hard line for me. Mm-hmm. Same with my partner. You'll never see his face. It's actually kind of funny because, well, hold on. I got to preface this for a minute. Okay. So I did not start creating content with the intent of not saying that I was in a relationship. That was never how I started. However, it became such a thing where men would sit here and say, this is why you're single. This is why no man wants you. This is why I even get comments sometimes. This is why no man will give you their seed. Okay? Which I got the seed. The seed has been fertilized. Love the seed. Okay? I have a child. And I used to laugh because I would like sit on Ryan's chest and I would be reading these comments, like showing him, and he'd be laughing and I'd be laughing and it'd be a whole thing. It then got to a point where, and let me be very clear, I'm not hiding the fact that I'm in a relationship, but I don't talk about it because I have a fear. Maybe it's legitimate, maybe it's not. I don't ever want my credentials to be judged on my marital status. And the second I start saying, no, what are you talking about? I am married, or I have been in a relationship for 15 years, or second I start saying any of that stuff, I feel as though, and again, whether this be legitimate or not, this is just a personal fear of mine as a creator. Single women have the same voice in a conversation as married women. Divorced women have the same voice in a conversation as single women. We're not supposed to have our ideas judged by our relationship to a man. And so I decided, you know what? I'm never going to do that. I'm never going to sit here and talk about my husband, because I feel as though the second I do that, I feel like I'm trying to legitimize a way that a man is trying to illegitimize my ideas. Does that make sense?
I'm wrapping my head around it. Yeah, I remember, I think Laura Danger's done something similar before, where someone said something similar to her in a comment and she was responding to it. And I think she said, like, I do in fact have a husband, I do in fact have children. And then kind of was sharing with you, is like, that doesn't make what I mean any less different. That doesn't change anything about my message, despite the context being incorrect.
Absolutely. And here's the thing. I'm not saying this will be a forever thing. I might a month from now start sharing that type of content. I think it also kind of became something where I tried really hard not to center myself in my content. I tried to make content with the intent of being a voice for women and not so much a voice for myself. Sometimes I want to share more about me as an individual. And I think I probably will at some point, but I kind of can't explain where I come from without kind of that preface and why I don't, so.
Do you make friends only content on TikTok?
No, never. I've just never, and it's funny because I've had these conversations like, why don't you make, and I think people want to see it. So I probably should start, and I'm sure I would enjoy it. But kind of
I
like how,
mean, you definitely have this like aura about you that like I was a little scared to shoot my shot and like have you on the podcast and or it took I don't know if you remember this, but I think it was probably 9, 10 months ago or something. Is I went to DM you and my kid was sitting next to me and hit the button and it said like hey Kaylee Cresta or hey Kayleigh, and then it was just that, and you can't send a second message if they're not friends with you. So it just said that, and I had no, and so I put on my story. I was like, "Hey, I just tried to make friends with this awesome creator Kayleigh. If any of you know her, please let
oh no.
finish my message for me." I don't know if anyone responded, but
So I'm going to tell you, I'll send you my number. Don't ever try to reach me by message, because I tell any creator friend, like, don't try and reach me any other way but by phone, because and kind of other fun fact, I didn't have any social media until I started creating content. So I don't have like that. I wasn't used to this kind of checking. Sometimes I miss like really important shit that I
yeah.
should see. And then it's like I see it months after, and I either feel like a massive asshole or so. Yeah.
I've definitely. I mean, I'm a bad actor on it too. I'm not great at responding, especially on TikTok. I check those things once every 6 months, maybe.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, I definitely won't hold it against you. Um,
Please don't. I beg.
let me ask you this: is as you make things now, I think obviously there's a huge part of it's like you're feeding your family with what you do. One of my favorite questions to ask creators like yourself is if you could get access pretty much to like you just had a team of content creators all within our niche. You had like 1,000 of us, and you could like put home one message, like one general topic to just unleash your army on the internet, like to deliver one message over the span of a year or 6 months or something. What do you think that message would be?
Um, Meaning topic, like
Yeah,
what
and
would
I'm
I?
happy to answer first if you want some more
So
time to think.
So I think probably this is going to sound kind of silly, but stop people pleasing, because um, I can honestly say that probably the most damage I've done to myself in my life has been trying to protect other people to the detriment of myself. And I think we do that as mothers. I think we do that as fathers. I think we do that as daughters, as friends, as we are constantly giving up so much of ourselves. And we're so afraid to say, I can't do that, right? I can't. And still, with all the work that I try to do with myself, I still have to be so conscious about not letting people take too much of me. And sometimes one of the most frustrating comments I see from people is I'll make a video about a common relationship problem. And both men and women in the comments will say, that's your fault or their fault for picking a bad husband. Nobody gets into relationships with bad people on purpose. We don't do this, right? This is
Yeah.
not a thing. But what ends up happening is not only do we try to save the relationship, do we try to fix our family, do we try to do all of these things, we end up saying, okay, if I give enough of myself, I'll be able to make up for the fact that they're not giving me any of them. And this is how we get exhausted and overwhelmed and just everything. To me, it so often relates back to this idea of people pleasing and of giving too much of ourselves. So I hope I understood the question and I gave you the right
Yeah.
answer.
No, that's
I
great.
think that would be it.
Yeah. And I think of the other day, I know my wife Alyssa, she was with our toddler, and she had it was just the two of them, and she shared about with me later that it was just a moment she wasn't proud of as a parent. And like as we were reflecting together, and I was trying to be like a space for her to regulate, She recognized that a huge reason why she got so flustered, there's a partial safety piece to it, but it was also that like other people were watching, and like the people pleasing in that was like, I don't want to look like a bad mom or an asshole in front of, you know, the neighbors or people at the park.
Yeah.
And so yeah, I feel like so much of the place, you know, I don't coach women all that much. You know, they're in a couple of my programs, but it's a lot more of me coaching the men. But I think if there were be to places where women can adjust, which, you know, I think you understand much better than I ever will of like what women are facing. I think the letting go of the pressure that we feel is, it's going to be really hard because it does fall on them. And I remember there was one video that completely shifted how I saw all of this. Was um I think we had she's about a year old. Our kid she would sound like she was choking, but she was usually just like choking on her own spit.
Mm-hmm.
And so she's making this noise. I'm like there with her, like 6 inches from her, like locked in, like what's going on with her right now. And from the other room, Alyssa is saying, "Hey, is she okay?" And then all of a sudden, she just comes running in because she thinks like I'm not handling it, which I get for sure now in retrospect. But I was annoyed when she kept trying to interrupt me while I was trying to focus on the child. So as the content creator I am, I went over to TikTok and shared the moment and said like, "Am I the asshole?" Um, and or I was like, you know, sharing a little bit of annoyance. I felt like, hey, I'm trying to be a good dad. Like, I don't think my communication to you should be the top priority. It should be the safety. And the comment that really rocked me, and I'm sure I could have found this before, but they had said that it always is going to fall on us. And a perfect example is that there's a family. It's a really sad story, but there was a kid and their dad went to the town pool, and mom was on like a weekend trip, multiple states away, and the kid drowned, and the mom was blamed for it. She's like, "How could you have been so, like, you know the rest of this?" But the fact that it still landed on her, like I'd never considered quite that women were feeling it, like that it was landing on them despite like such an obvious moment where it shouldn't land on them.
Right.
And so I think ever since then, like I'm very delicate, and I try to do the best to acknowledge, like, I know it's insanely hard to put down is that people pleasing, because like people are going to come for your neck because you're the mom. um
And
yeah, I hear you.
you know, two quick points from this. So I had made a video talking about, I had stitched another mother who was saying, you know, she didn't really enjoy motherhood, right? She loved her kids. And I had stitched this video. And what I talked about was that, yeah, most moments are crazy, right? But you love your children. And we are so afraid to talk about how hard it is because the first response we get is that we don't love our children. And this was, I believe it was like almost a 4-minute video. And I tried so hard to make sure that I really missed nothing, because I kind of hoped that it would be this moment where mothers were able to look and go, it's okay. What I feel is okay, right? And one of the comments that I got almost immediately was from a woman who said, "Can't relate. I absolutely love my kids." I just spent almost 4 minutes talking about how you love your kids. I even went so, and I, because I truly believe this, because you love your kids so much is why motherhood is so stressful. We're so scared we're going to do it wrong because we love our kids so much, right? We're trying so hard. We don't want to pass on generational trauma, and we want to make sure that they feel heard in a way that we didn't feel heard, and we want to make sure they have everything that they need and everything that they want, and you know, all these different things. And I intentionally made the point that mothers are so afraid to say that they're stressed because they'll be accused of hating their children. And one of the first comments from a fellow mother was, "Can't relate. I love my kids." And it was, you know, there's certain moments, I'm sure you can relate as a content creator, where you get so frustrated, right? You wish so badly. Like there's a part of me that sometimes is like, I should just go live in those moments and explain it and talk about it. And I made the reply video. It's sitting in my drafts. It hasn't been posted because I just don't feel it's perfect, right? There's this need, and it's kind of this
Is that people pleasing right there?
Yes, that's exactly what it is. And it's kind of like this metaphor for motherhood at large, right? I'm not putting my words out there because I'm so afraid that they have to be perfect before I do. And isn't that what I'm kind of talking about as a whole? It's just, you see how it's so ingrained in us, right? From the time we're literal babies, it's ingrained in us. And just second quick point, I told you, I don't stop talking till someone makes me. Back to kind of something that was said at the beginning when I was talking about how our content is so equally as important, right? And you hit the nail on the head so hard when you said you were frustrated because you were trying to do something and still somebody was kind of over your shoulder. And I think this is a really big problem, is that men typically don't start to make changes until they feel that there's a problem and they have no choice. Not to say that is the case for all men, but I think typically that's what inspires change. And then they start to make the change. And because, mom or partner has been doing this whole time, it's kind of this over your shoulder, we don't have time for this, you should be doing it right. And a lot of men in that moment, if they're not committed to the change, say, fuck this, I'm not going to be told I'm doing it right anyways, so I'm going to stop trying. And there's so many different things at play, right? Mom has been doing it forever, right? Since the baby's been born. It's second nature to her. She doesn't have to think about it. And because there was never kind of a learning curve for her, because moms don't really get the opportunity to have this learning curve, we just have to sink or swim. We find frustration in watching someone else get to have the learning curve. And the reverse is men saying, I'm trying here, but I don't know how. So just be patient with me and I'll get it. And we have even more resentment. And that's what we don't talk about. We don't say, listen, when you start to change, you might find even more resentment. You're going to come out just fine on the other side, but it doesn't mean it's not going to get harder before it gets easier.
Yeah. I've never heard it put quite that way, of how like there's a resentment over the lengthier learning curve that we get to have as dads. I remember there was I think it was I made a video about how I was working on changing a blowout diaper with our newborn, and I remember like Alyssa loved pushing me out of the way at the very beginning, despite me being the first changer of like the first 10 diapers.
Yeah.
And I was on paternity leave, so like I was there with her. Like I wasn't absent at the very beginning, but there were a lot of moments where she really wanted to prioritize, like our child's regulation in the moment rather than me figuring out and using the amount of wipes that I needed to get the job done.
Yeah.
And I remember like pushing back one time, and I said like, you can stroke her head, you can help her regulate. I'm changing this diaper. Fuck off. Like I got this one. And I remember, I think someone in the comment about it was, I forget what they're saying, is like, why does the man's feelings matter? Like we just need the job done or something. And I remember thinking after I commented, this might be a book title someday, is Men's Training Wheels Matter Too.
Yeah, I love that. That should be a book title.
But it sounds like what you're kind of pointing out is that, okay, we get to have training wheels oftentimes because we don't have the sink or swim, versus when we're just given bikes and you're like, you're going to scrape yourself up real good, but like you're going to learn real quick.
Perfect. I mean, that's such a perfect metaphor, truly. And I think we have to be conscious of the fact that the training wheels do matter. The emotions do matter. Sometimes we don't have time for them to matter in the moment. right? I don't think that's to say that we shouldn't talk about them. I think sometimes in the moment it's got to get it done. Unfortunately, this is just the nature of our lives, right? As adults, there's so little time to do the stuff that matters, and we're fighting to prioritize what matters the most, and this and that. And when you get to the end of the day, sometimes you're both so freaking tired you don't sit down and talk about feelings, right? To that point, I made that pumpkin patch stitch.
Yeah, I remember that one.
And I saw a lot of comments, again, very both men and women, saying he didn't want to go to the pumpkin patch. Who cares? Like, that's not harming the kids for him to say that. If he hates the pumpkin patch and the $24 pumpkin, no problem. When the kids weren't right behind them within 3 feet at the end of the day, or well, the kids were picking the pumpkin and they're standing behind taking the picture, right? Totally normal for couples to be like, can you believe we just paid $40 for a pumpkin? Totally normal, right? But we're not painting the experience with a negative brush for the kids right in front of them. Nothing to say that as partners, we can't have this conversation about how life is hard and life is difficult and we're feeling, this and that and whatever. It's sometimes we can't do it right then. Different situations, but kind of the same type of point, right? And in that moment, I think it's important, right? Because chances are, I don't want to speak for her, but chances are maybe later that day, it meant a lot to your wife that you said, no, I'm going to change this diaper. I've got this. I can do this, right? In the moment, sometimes it's frustrating, but sometimes we walk away and say, you know what? They cared. They cared enough. Sometimes in the moment, everything's stressful. We can't reflect on it that way, but not to say that later in the day, it wasn't a positive thing.
Yeah. I want to come back for a second because I think one of the things you said is a huge part of what you are helping a lot of women with is identifying and like giving words to what they're experiencing. But once they have words, they can point to it. And I would say my answer to the 1,000 creator message question is if we could take like could agree on about 20 vocab words and just use the shit out of them until it was just generally a part of our culture. Mental load, invisible labor, domestic labor, emotional labor, matrescence, kin keeping. Those are the top like 6 that I really try to train people on.
Mm-hmm.
I think that words really formulate like how we think and how we learn and see the world around us. Because I think my favorite cartoon to metaphor around is there are 2 fish swimming, and then there was another older fish swimming the other way and said, "Hey, how's the water today?" And the 2 fish look at each other like, "What's water?" And I feel like that's what I'm doing is I'm pointing out what that feeling you have on your fin, that's water. What do you think are some of the things that you're helping women come use? Like, what is the language that they're getting out of hearing you that is empowering them? Sometimes it's vocabulary, but sometimes it's bigger concepts. What do you think it is?
So it's funny, I haven't posted it, but I've filmed a video probably last week where I was talking about how the reason that a lot of us don't have the words to explain how we're feeling is because no one ever gives us the chance to talk about how we're feeling. So we've never had the opportunity to string those words together for anyone. So it's not that we don't have them sometimes, it's that we haven't been allowed to develop our thoughts. And it's different. Our inner monologue doesn't always give us a chance to kind of develop these really important things for ourselves. So I think that's part of it. I think empowering people to have the conversation and to say what they feel out loud, because a lot of times that's one of the most rewarding things that I hear is men saying they finally had the opportunity to have the conversation because of a video, but a woman saying, I was able to start the conversation by sending your video so that it just opens the door. And I think what we find is that a lot of couples just don't have the opportunity to open the door, and sometimes it's not even intentional.
Mm.
So, and kind of to that point, we're coming from different generations that didn't necessarily allow us to talk about our feelings. We're so busy at the end of the day that there's just not the mental capacity to do it. Some people, it's exactly as you were just talking about, just not having the vocabulary, right? They're experiencing the effects of invisible labor, but they've never heard the term. So sometimes I think what also happens is if we're not given a word for something, we're meant to believe that it's not important enough to exist. And
Mm.
so when you have things like the word invisible labor, if somebody hasn't been handed that, right, it's like you don't have the tool. You don't have the tool to talk about it.
Yeah.
And once you do, you kind of can open up somebody's whole field of vision. So I think in a lot of ways, what I gave you 17 answers, my last one will be this. Letting people know it's okay, right? Um, oh, wait a minute. Someone said this. Thousands of people said that it's true for them too. So I'm not crazy for feeling it. And sometimes it's just that, just having the confidence to be able to say, this is real, this matters, and I can say it out loud. That was so long. I'm so sorry.
It, I think the reason I've really, I said this at the beginning. I think there's a lot of academic level understanding, but you have a lot of like thinking about some of the concepts you just shared. Like it takes a little bit to wrap my head around, but I'm grateful that there are content creators out there giving this out for free, so that we can continue growing.
Thank
As
you.
maybe a last question here, what do you think the next couple of years of you educating and empowering women looks like, and especially now that we have just gone through a pretty big blow within, I'll say, the feminist community, or just like America at large. What do you think the next couple of years are going to look like in terms of is it going to be semi business as usual, consistently putting out things that are just calling out bullshit when you see it, or are there other things coming down the pipeline too?
You know, I truly, and I don't talk about it online. I have been really preoccupied. Like I said, I mean, my dad's divorce has been very eye opening to family court, very really hard in a lot of ways, and it's taken a ton of time. I mean, sometimes literally 50 hours a week. And it's caused so much stress and anxiety and pain and all of these things, so that even I have a few hours at the end of the day, I just want to see my kid. Right, I just want to see my child. I just want to and sometimes I just want to stare at a white wall. So I think this is coming up, coming to an end. But I think it's business as usual with content. But if you were to ask me, like, what's my goal, I don't know when that happens. Like, I would love to have a show. That would be my main goal, where like I have a couch that I can just put inspiring people on and just talk. That's what I would love. I don't know if that's going to happen, but if you were asking me what's my long-term goal, I would love to do that. I would love to. I have a lot of things I want to do. I haven't put anything in the pipeline because I have just not known how I'm going to be able to commit to things. And that's been really frustrating. It's been really sad too, because, it's like I know what I want to be doing, and sometimes I just don't. I just haven't had the time. So that's been hard. But next week is a really big date that might, it's not going to be the outcome that we hoped for, but it's going to be an outcome. And hopefully that means I'll be back.
Sounds
So,
it might open up a bit of the canvas for what your future looks like and your creative juices.
exactly. How about you? What's the long term goal? You have to write the book with that book title. I'm not going to let you not.
I don't know if so. I have an agent right now. I'm working on my proposal, and we're recognizing I need to prioritize this a lot more the next couple months, because especially knowing how book deals are kind of flying off the shelves after the 45th president came in and the Me Too movement started, I'm anticipating we'll be seeing something similar to that. But I
Right.
think I'll be writing somewhat of like the male voice version of Fair Play,
Mm,
um, because I think there's a lot of guys that would benefit so much from Fair Play, and they honestly just they need to hear it in a man's voice,
mhm,
which I will be the one to take advantage of that market.
mhm.
But which I feel guilty about. But at the same time, like I know for progress to happen, that needs to happen. So that's a big one. And or I think I've gotten pretty good at coaching men and helping them implement fair play method. The next year, one of the things I'm going to be focusing a lot more on is corporate workshops and getting this language into corporate cultures. So I did my first one a couple months ago, and I'm looking
Really
forward to talking to a lot more parent ERGs.
awesome. So I've got a comment because I heard you say something similar at the beginning. And I have to say it to you. And I certainly, my goal is never to try and speak for all women or anything like that. But um, I notice that you constantly take yourself out of the conversation, and I think it speaks to your level of awareness, which I think is really, really amazing, and that you've done so much work that's so obvious. But as a woman looking you in the eye right now, virtually, I got to tell you, don't sell yourself short that way. I again, I don't want to speak for all women because I know that sometimes it can come off that that's not my goal, but
Yeah.
I think that you've genuinely done the work, right? And I think that you having a seat at the table as somebody who wants to make real change doesn't mean that you're taking a chair from a woman. It just means that you're sitting next to us. And,
Mm.
and that might be contrary to something that somebody else, and I know sometimes, but I just have to say that because I've heard you sell yourself short a few times. And one thing that's very obvious to me is that you really care about this, right? You're not here because it's a topic of conversation. You're here because it's something that matters. It's something that's made a difference in your life, and it's a difference you want to make in other people's lives. And I think we need as many people who genuinely want to change the landscape of what the family looks at home,
Mm.
regardless of, you just have to genuinely care about it. And unfortunately, you know, sometimes that's not true of everyone, but when we have that, you should be at the table. So I hope it makes sense what I'm trying to say, but
Yeah.
moral of the story is don't sell yourself short. And I think
Yeah.
it's wonderful, and I hope you
I
keep.
don't think I had done enough of the work back when Roe v. Wade was overturned, and it made a lot more sense for me to just keep my mouth shut and listen more. And yeah, I do. After the election, I think I I was like, I don't want to talk about this because like I don't want it to hurt my business and feeding my family. I'm the main breadwinner, but not the only one.
Mhm,
Um, but at the same time, it felt totally tone deaf for me to not address the collective pain that women were going through.
mhm,
And I made the video. I purposely made it longer than 90 seconds. I didn't want it to overperform. I didn't start off with a purposefully strong hook.
mhm,
And it still hit 500,000, which is pretty good for me. Um, and I 2,000 comments, but I invited also. I was like, you guys don't have to blow up my comment section, but if you need a safe space to vent,
mhm,
just drop it in the DM and do rage : and that, so that I know I don't necessarily need to read it, but if you need the safe space, it's there.
mhm.
um, and I was surprised on the positive. I don't know why I was surprised, but I was kind of surprised on the level of positive response I got from that. And I
Mhm.
think the main message of it was like misogyny won the election more than anything.
Well, and I think in the interest of trying to be a safe space, you sometimes, because you've done the work, you try to not overstep certain things, and what you find is that when you do talk, when you do open up the conversation, a lot of women are going to find comfort in hearing the words come from a man, right? One thing that you are doing is you're sharing actual experiences, which I think is very important. You're not so much, and not to say that you don't talk about topics at large, but you're sharing real experiences, which gives women the opportunity to kind of examine what's going on at home. um, lets them know that they're not alone if they're having, and sometimes it gives us the opportunity to take a step back, because sometimes we're too close to things, right? And so it gives us the opportunity to examine what's happening at home. And sometimes men are only going to listen to other men, right? Do I like that fact? No. But it doesn't matter if I like it, I have to acknowledge it, right? So I think we all have to take part in the discussion, especially when it's someone who's really doing that work, right? We've definitely seen people come and go who found it was a trendy subject or whatever. But it always becomes immediately evident. One thing, you're sharing your actual experiences and how you're trying to implement this every day. That takes real work. That's not easy. And I think it's also important, as someone who's implementing it in your life, you're showing it's not easy, but it's worth it in the end. Do you feel as though you and your wife have a much better relationship, deeper relationship? I'm curious, if you don't mind me asking, what are some of the changes you've seen since you've implemented that, just between you two as a couple?
I think a micro moment that is a really good like microcosm of what I think has been going on with us the past 2.5 years since trying to implement fair play. There was a moment last week when so we drink seltzers a lot, polar in our home, Alyssa, and then I'm prefacing so it makes sense when I put it in the whole story. We also feed our cats out of cans. They usually need to get rinsed out. And Alyssa really enjoys these little Propel packets like Gatorade. The Propel packets often end up right next to the sink. The cat food cans often end up just getting rinsed out but left in the sink.
Mm-hmm.
And when the Polar Seltzer 12 pack is done, she is drinking more of them, so she usually tosses it on the floor. And one day, I came into the kitchen and saw all three of those things at the same time out. I know one of them needs to go in recycle. Two of them need to go in recycling. One needs to go in trash. I own the dishes in our house, and so I asked her a little bit later, maybe like an hour or so later. I was like, "What work did I do in here?" And the dishes still looked like a mess, but I had just done the cans and the trash. And she's like, "It doesn't look like you've done anything in here." I was like, "I do invisible labor."
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, "You just throw those things on the ground, you forget they exist because you know that I'm going to do the rest of the work." Similar with the Propel packets and the cat food cans. Um, and similarly, I said at the beginning when we were talking that I was doing the dishes the other night, and she was calling me out. I was slacking a little bit. The speed I was doing. I wasn't. I think I was probably doing a 85-90% effort. I wasn't lysoling the counters like I had agreed to. And I was asking, like, has that been impacting you? And she's like, I think maybe it has. And I was like, that, what I coach to is having a weekly meeting with your partner where you talk about operations. And I was like, I need you to bring that to me. Like, cause right now, like, it's because I'm kind of asking you, I'm prompting you, it's okay. But if this is coming out in resentment in other ways, then we're not solving the problem that the goal of that meeting is to have. So I was kind of requesting into our coaching, or like, I need you to bring those to the meeting when I know I'm much better at receiving that feedback.
Mm-hmm.
So, I think the weekly meetings we've been, the past 52 weeks, we've probably done 20, maybe 30 of them. We haven't been perfect. So I think the implementation of that's like a huge component to what I coach men to do, is run that meeting, and get ahead of the mental load before your wife is. Because oftentimes I hear the guys say, like, I can't catch up. Like, she's already thinking about Christmas in September. Like, I don't know how to compete with that. And I was like, we'll bring it up in your weekly meeting.
Yeah.
And then she doesn't feel lonely in that she thinks she's the only one doing it. And she's like, oh, he's talking about it too. Great that we can talk about it. So I think what it's done for us is, I think it's improved the way that we connect. Even our physical intimacy has not been the way that I would love it, and we've had much better forums for talking about that, where
Hmm.
we know in that weekly meeting, like, tough things could come up. And we're right now, we're in the middle of moving from our house and moving back into our old apartment, where we have a multifamily. We're moving back into the first floor,
Hmm.
and it's smaller, and we're going to share our room with our toddler. um, so we're like, well, we're not going to have the normal physical intimacy that we might have at the end of the night. So we're going to have to schedule it if we want it to be a thing.
Right.
So we've had multiple conversations now about it. And once we kind of settle in, probably going to have like a purposeful, scantily dressed cuddle session once a week, something like that. So I think I much better understand her experience. I see the, from all the content I've made about it, I see the people pleasing that she's dealing with and unlearning. I see the value of so much of the invisible labor that she historically always did. And I feel a little bit more empowered to be annoyed when I've asked her, 10 times to throw your fucking Propel packets straight in the trash.
Yeah.
Um, but at the same time, I have so much more empathy for when she gets frustrated with me
Yeah.
for the same things in a different element of the home. So I think we've made a lot of huge strides towards equity, and/or equality. And I think, yeah, just like I think we've always been good at having hard conversations, but we've improved the structure for them for sure.
Yeah. I mean, and I think you brought up something really important. A lot of times what actually makes or breaks a relationship, a lot of times what actually matters to a relationship is not the big stuff, it's the Propel packets. It's the cat food cans. This is the stuff that actually drives marriages in one way or the other. And because everybody's family looks different in a million different ways, right? Who's making the money, who's doing the laundry, who's splitting the dishes, who's doing, everybody's family looks different. And a lot of times what happens when we're trying to read books, when we're trying to educate ourselves, there are these very generalized ideas. And then when we try to implement them, we don't quite know where to put the Propel packets, right? And that's the hard part, is implementing it into your everyday life. I'll give you a funny example. I'm always cold. Ryan is always hot. Okay, always. We fight over the thermostat. I put it up, he puts it down. I put it up, he puts it down. So what he would always do is, before I'd go to bed, he would put on my heated blanket 3 hours before I would get into bed. Okay, he would kind of like watch, I guarantee you she'll go to bed somewhere around this time, and he would put on my heated blanket. We hit this, just stressful time in life. Okay, and he stopped turning on my heated blanket, and I was pissed. I was like, you might as well shun me, not come home at night. It was such a dramatic change. And for like 2 weeks, I was like, walking around, and I was pissed. I was genuinely pissed off. And I didn't stop to talk to him about it because I was so hurt. And
Mhm.
again, we have to acknowledge these certain human tendencies that we have. I didn't want to talk to him about it. I wanted to be pissed off about it because we were just in a difficult time in life. And so finally I come to my senses and I talk to him about it, and he's like, you put the heated blanket on almost a whole week way beforehand because you were going in there and you were writing. So I stopped putting it on because for a whole week, every time I went in there and went to turn it on, it was already on. I had never even thought about this, right? I had never even stopped to be like, Yeah, you know what I did? And he was right. I did. And because I wanted to walk around and be, I always say I'm in a testy mood, right? I wanted to walk around and I wanted to be testy. Um, I didn't communicate it. And
Mm.
so we went 2 whole weeks just him not knowing why I was in a mood. Um, but they're the little things, right? They're the ways that we judge our partner. And more importantly, they're the ways we judge our partner's feelings surrounding us. And sometimes I think that we are just as sensitive to how we think our partner thinks of us as we are about our partner. You know, sometimes it's not their behavior. It's the way we think they're treating us. And that's when we really start to get hurt and we really start to get angry. And when we apply that, at a smaller level, we start to talk and we start to communicate. And I love that you do that, that you stopped and you were like, what did I do today? Right. And because it was something you wanted to talk about, but instead of just letting it build up and getting resentful, you talked about it. And I think when you look at couples that last, someone like you and your wife are always going to end up as the couple who lasted because they talked. And it's something we overlook all the time.
Yeah, and we get so used to the default setting being when you come home, you have time, and then kids come up, and then you never have the conversation. Oh, wait a second, that was a structure that we really benefited from. That now we have to create. It's not just going to be there by
Right.
default. Well, Kayleigh, thank you so much for coming and being here with me today. One thing I just want to share with you. Back, I think it was March, over a year ago, I made this video of the top 5 creators that I would call my big sisters.
Hmm.
And you were not part of the top 5. You were an honorable mention because I'd never met you before.
Yeah.
The other 5 I had met before. So it's really cool knowing that you would be a part of that top 6 for me, that you were one of the content creators that really helped me grow into seeing so many of the things that I knew my wife was dealing with that I didn't have words for before. I didn't have empathy for before. So thank you so much for what you do on a consistent basis. And thank you for taking the time today to be with us.
Thank you for having me. That is such a special compliment, and it means more to me than you know. So thank you. I loved this, and I will send you my number so that I never miss a message.
Okay.
And that's what we really learned today is that I'm
Yeah.
gonna check my messages. But you are amazing. Don't ever change. And thank you for having me.
You're welcome.